Hi guys, it's Monday, and this is my third crack at doing this video because it's a tough one. I want to be sensitive, but I think it does have to be talked about because I was told a story on Twitter over the weekend by a guy, and it just broke my heart. And it's connected to this whole Me Too, the growing list of men who have been accused of sexual assault, sexual misconduct, sexual impropriety, sexual harassment, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, this was in the backdrop of the Louis C.K. stuff, which we've known about since 2015. That one angers me. The Eddie Berganza stuff at DC, which again, not a new story. DC finally got rid of the guy, suspended him anyway. I mean, the reason those two anger me is this is not new. The women came forward before, and it wasn't socially acceptable to believe them then. And I know I'm criticizing DC Comics wearing an Aquaman shirt. I'm a fan, you know. I'm not a Marvel zombie going, yeah, DC sucks, this is proof. This isn't a partisan thing, okay? Then we got the stuff, Andrew Kreisberg on The Flash, which, horrifying. 14 women and 5 men accusing him of impropriety. And then, of course, the Roy Moore stuff about dating and possibly molesting 14 to 16-year-old girls. And then Sean Hannity did a puff interview, which Roy Moore managed to screw that up. And then 6 advertising companies dropped him, which, interestingly, these companies like Keurig, Realtor.com, 23andMe, they all advertise on MSNBC as well. I have seen their ads, and I don't watch Fox News. It's interesting. Like, for all the idea that people on the other side of the political spectrum from you have nothing in common with you, advertising demographic targeting says you're wrong. Strangely, people of all political stripes need personal DNA testing, online realtors, and old people drugs. We're not that different. We're not that different. As much as you want to believe that that person on the other side of the political divide is a monster crossed with an alien, they're not. They're people, and for every, Roy Moore, there is an Anthony Weiner, right? Who was a New York Democrat, who did similar to what Roy Moore is being accused of, and there I am, the if true, that MSNBC has spent the entire weekend criticizing that politicians are saying if true. In that case, they have to. This isn't the same as, Harvey Weinstein didn't deny it until he did. Him going to therapy for the whole week half-heartedly is an admission he did something. He only, retaliated openly when that didn't get him out of trouble. Louis C.K. admitted to what he did, or Louis C.K. I don't know how you pronounce his first name. I was surprised that I heard Louis. Kevin Spacey didn't deny it. Roy Moore has. Now, Roy Moore denied it badly. And this is something I want to talk about, because no matter what you think about Roy Moore, no matter what you think about that specific case, there's certain ground rules that I think should apply on this thing, and certain things that people should know are just statistically and factually not accurate. Because Roy Moore's defense is he never dated a young lady without her mother's permission, and it was not generally his habit to date teenage girls when he was in his 30s. That was not a good defense. But the worst thing he did, where he was out at a rally, I believe, and he's floating this idea that this whole thing is either a Democratic conspiracy, a Republican establishment conspiracy against him, or both. And he said, basically, why would a grown woman wait 40 years to come forward? And this is supposed to indicate some element of falsehood that she should not be believed. And anybody who has any sort of experience advocating for victims' rights, covering groups that do these sorts of things, we know that some people do take that long. I know, I've talked to Holocaust survivors and the children of Holocaust survivors who, you hear these stories and either the survivor themselves will suddenly start talking about the sexual assaults they experienced at the hands of the Nazis, and they're in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And this happened to them when they were barely 18, 19 years old. So that's 60 years in some cases that they didn't talk about it. And their kids are floored. I mean, it's interesting because this is true of war veterans as well. When I was doing the promotions for Battle Station Specific with IDOS, and we were doing all the Bomber Girl stuff, and I went around and talked to some veterans and things like that, and gave them the little Zippo lighters they gave us with our Bomber Girl art, and it was really great. But these guys started telling us stories, and you could see that their kids had never heard this before. And it was because in that moment, I wasn't just a person. I was like this patron saint of happiness, you know, that fun, that pretty memory from that time, not the horribleness. And there are a lot of Vietnam veterans, Korea veterans, who are just now, years later, finally seeking PTSD treatment because they want to be done with it. There isn't sufficient funding for these, in this case, brave men, mostly, for it. And I see a lot of similarities between veterans, and my stepdad's a veteran, who don't talk about their experiences, and women of a similar age who don't talk about their experiences. You have to keep in mind that back then, this was not talked about. The idea of talking about sexual assault didn't really even get going until the second wave of feminism in, you know, the 1960s and 1970s. It really didn't become mostly acceptable somewhat until the Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill scandal in the 1990s. If it wasn't a violent, penetrative rape, it wasn't even a crime in a lot of cases until they changed their rape laws in the 1990s. So why talk about it? You have to understand how much thinking about sexual assault and sexual harassment have changed even in my lifetime. And I was born in 78. In the 80s, a lot of things were considered okay that would not be okay now. In the 90s, a lot of things were considered okay that would not be considered okay now. Thing about this Roy Moore thing is, even back then, dating a 14-year-old girl when you were in your 30s. I'm sorry, I lived in the South. No, this isn't just an Alabama thing, as Saturday Night Live tried to imply. Like, no, I'm sorry, I lived in Knoxville, Tennessee. It was not a... And it's funny, because I learned to talk in Knoxville, and so every so often it starts coming out. If I'm around it enough, it starts coming out. And I don't even realize it. I'm down there, I come back, I start twanging, I'm like, oh dear God, my poor mother didn't know if I was saying party or potty. Toilet training was awesome. But no, it is not just a Southern thing. Like, there's some things that are Southern things. One of them is minding your business. And so I understand why Alabama voters would be a bit hesitant to just condemn the guy based on an accusation. I don't blame them for that. I know a lot of people are like, what's wrong with Alabama? Well, you mind your business. And I think that we can't hit a point where the accusation alone is enough to condemn. But Roy Moore's response is what I'm more concerned about. And his statement that basically that the implication that her waiting 40 years to tell someone is an indication she's lying is just not true. There are plenty of people who are truthful and just don't say anything for various reasons. One reason that I haven't mentioned is they tried to tell someone, it didn't go well, and so they shut up about it. Or they hinted about it, but don't come right out and say it. In the case of this poor woman in Alabama, the Washington Post found her. It was a story they did not expect, apparently. They just went through all these 30 different sources and eventually came to her. So somebody knew about it somewhere to find her. She did not seek out the Washington Post. And that's telling. I mean, why is she coming forward now? Well, someone asked. Someone was actually interested in hearing her story. And this isn't a question of finding Roy Moore guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Accusations like this are tests of character. And I think it's important to talk about the fact that his assertion that people don't keep these things a secret for 40 years. This guy was a judge. He is in a position to know the facts about sexual assault. I think a lot of people who aren't involved in this stuff directly don't know that. And it sounds logical. Like, why would you wait 40 years to say something? Because you're humiliated. Or in the case of the Holocaust survivors I talked to, they thought they had no right to complain because they had it better than most people. They were just raped. They weren't killed. And so they actually felt grateful that worse didn't happen to them. They were still alive. So they just want to put it away and move on with their life. And that is their right. Now, if something comes up, they're going to talk about it. It just isn't something they want to dwell on. It's similar to, a lot of the stuff, Soviet occupation of Eastern European countries. There's a lot of stuff that they weren't allowed to talk about until the 1990s, and there's serious social problems accordingly that they are still working through. There are a lot of reasons why somebody would wait 40 years before publicly telling their story. There are a lot of reasons why people will never tell their story publicly. Some of it is opportunity. Nobody was especially interested in Roy Moore in this way until he ran for a Senate seat. When he was a state judge, it didn't make national news. So a news outlet like the Washington Post wouldn't go down there, wouldn't actually ask around. Maybe this was the first time she got a chance to tell her story. Doesn't mean she's lying. Doesn't mean guaranteed 100% she's not, but it does not mean she's lying. So let's clear that up there. And personally, I think there should be a very high bar flat out saying someone is lying. It does happen. It does happen. But it is rare. It's interesting. I talked to my police officer friend about this, and he said that a lot of the false accusations that he saw go something like false rape allegations go something like they got embarrassed that they'd had sex with a guy, told their friend freaked out, story got too big, next thing you know, they're in a police station. under a bit of questioning, they come clean, they admit it, they don't stand by their story. People, as a rule, with notable exceptions, do not outright lie to a cop. But, you know, I have police who are friends, and they tell me there's a lot of false allegations of that sort that they have seen, and I believe them. Now, I'm not a cop. And if somebody comes to me with a story, if they're male or female, I lose nothing by giving them a sympathetic ear. You guys know that I am not an advocate for pressuring someone to come forward. I am happy to support someone if they want to come forward, but it has to be their choice. You cannot make them for that. And, you know, that was confirmed by my cop friends saying, yeah, the false accusations come because somebody gets dragged into the police station. You know, you have to be a good woman. You have to be good for all women by reporting this scumbag, you know. A white lie suddenly became not so white. But the guy on Twitter told me earlier today, it might have actually been yesterday, but I just saw it today, that he tried to participate in the Me Too thing. In his case, he was abused by his girlfriend. She apparently stabbed him. And when he told his story, he was met with the response, and apparently more than one person did this to them. It was either, you're lying, couldn't have happened, or you must have deserved it. And, you know, the implication being it was because he was male and therefore didn't seem like a proper victim in this case. I have seen guys I know participate in Me Too on Facebook, and it's interesting because before they said anything, I wouldn't have assumed something bad happened to them when they were a kid, but I got to admit, it now fills in my understanding of them. I am more patient about certain elements of their personality than I was before I knew that happened to them. It is not your role as a person who is not in law enforcement or in politics or in, you know, a position of power. It isn't your role to decide whether someone in your life is lying. As someone who has had to make choices, because I was a convention runner and there were complaints and I had to handle them. And let me tell you, no matter what you decide, somebody's not happy. There's no way to please everybody. You have to make the tough call. If you're not in that position, you don't have to decide whether the person's telling the truth or not. Especially if they're not asking you to cut someone off or anything like that. If they just want to tell you, if they just want to get it off their chest, if they don't want to have to hide it anymore, don't tell them they're lying or that they must have deserved it. Like, that is not okay to say just because they're male. This whole sexual harassment, sexual misconduct thing is a gendered issue simply because men are more likely to be in positions of power than women, especially in the entertainment industry and politics in Silicon Valley and all these fields that are currently, you know. But every so often, there's a story in the news about a female teacher sleeping with a student. That's crime too. That's criminal. I mean, Mary Kay Letourneau, you know, there were a few other women that got caught since then. And that is a position where a teacher is in a position of authority over a student. There, in some countries, the age of consent is actually higher precisely if you're in a relationship like that where someone is your teacher, your professor, or something like that. If the balance of power was more equal, I think we'd see female Harvey Weinsteins. I am not one of these people who believe that men are inherently more evil than women. Some men have just had more access to power and they got twisted by it. I don't believe that power inherently corrupts. I know a lot of people who are very powerful who would never do anything like that. I know a lot of guys in business, guys have helped me, who they say, I do well. I want other people to do well. And I don't want people to think that every powerful man is this scumbag just waiting to get caught. It's not true. But it's also not true that women are angels unless unless you find out otherwise. There are some bad women out there, and they do bad things. Man, there are some vice presidents, female vice presidents, evil, when I used to work in TV. Just awful, just abused people whenever they could. And it wasn't sexual, they found other ways. But abuse is abuse. It doesn't make it not abuse just because there's no sexual component. But in this case, this guy, it was intimate partner violence. And that's what made me decide to make this video, is that we still have more work to do defusing these myths, because people are getting re-victimized. Men and women alike are getting re-victimized because of these myths. We do have to educate people on the facts of not just sexual assault, but also sexual harassment, sexual misconduct. Now, not all these things are criminal. They don't have to be criminal to recognize that they poison a work environment. They poison a political environment. They stifle female participation in this case. As we get more women into politics, if people still continue to behave poorly, it's just going to be stifling participation across the board. And that's not good either. We don't want to just replace one set of problems for another set of problems. We want to handle these problems better. And that starts by not rejecting someone when they take a risk and come to you and tell you their story. This guy, I can't prove he's telling the truth. That's not my job there. The crazy thing about this whole thing is I first heard the phrase listen and believe in the 1990s. I remember that because Beverly Hills 90210 was on the air, and they did a thing where the Andrea character volunteered at a rape crisis hotline, because peer counseling was just, it was a new thing back then. A bunch of us were just getting into this idea of supporting other people regarding gendered violence, sexual violence. In Canada, it was in the aftermath of the L'École Polytechnique school shooting. We were all sort of waking up to the fact that there was sort of this level of bad behavior that the legal system couldn't do anything about, and all we could do is put people back together who'd had these bad experiences. And that's when I'd first heard on 90210, I remember something like, ours is not to reason why, ours is just to listen and try not to cry. But what we had been told was listen and believe. That when you're taking that call, when you are that peer support, you're not the person's judge. You are there to listen. Because you don't have to do anything other than listen. And of course, this very good concept got turned into you must automatically not just believe, but act. It can mean so much to somebody to just be able to tell their story and lift that shame. Sometimes that's all they need. Sometimes even someone can go through the legal system and the person has a conviction, but they still walk around with a lot of shame because somebody tells them, oh, you ruined that person's life. No, they didn't. Their own bad choices ruined their life, but they still feel incredibly guilty. And they need to talk about it. Sometimes they can't talk about it to people in their direct life. They need to talk to a relative stranger on the internet. And I know that one thing I've found through my own experiences is people are great at caring about abuse when it's something that happens to someone far, far away. You know, that's why Saturday Night Live go, ha, 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 Roy Moore, after insisting initially that there was no way to make the Harvey Weinstein thing funny, because Harvey Weinstein happened in their industry, whereas Roy Moore they saw as happening as a backwater in Alabama, far, far away, didn't affect them. People respond very badly when abuse happens in their own backyard to people they know in their own communities because they don't want to believe it could happen there. It takes away their presumption of safety. Maybe I'm lucky that I had my presumption of safety taken away from me years ago. But I don't have that immediate knee-jerk reaction. Somebody comes to me and although I did struggle with the George Takei accusation, that one was tough. But I'm waiting. I don't want to believe it, but we'll wait. George Takei's a lovely man. But I don't know who he was in 1981 when the thing was supposed to happen. And man, if he didn't do it, it's awful that he has to go through this process. That's why false accusations are a form of abuse themselves. Keep that in mind, that some abusers use the system to perpetuate the abuse of their target. But that has nothing to do with most people watching this. Just please, if someone tells you that something bad happened to them, male, female, trans, genderqueer, intersex, doesn't matter. I can't believe I have to say this, but I guess I do. You must have deserved it is not something you should say. You're lying is certainly something you shouldn't say. You know, unless you have to make a decision. That's not a case I'm talking about there. If you don't know what to say, ask questions. What are you looking for? Telling me this might be a start. Like, what are you looking for from me here? Because most of the time I'm just saying nothing. I just want you to listen. Okay, I can do that. You know, you can empathize that that's awful. I'm so sorry that happened to you. You gotta mean it, or else it sounds like a platitude. But maybe the guy who said something will see this video. Maybe one of his friends will see this and point him in this direction. This is not a man thing. This is a woman thing. This is a human thing. And that's why I showed that Deadline page where, you know, all the sponsors that dropped Sean Hannity after the Roy Moore thing also advertise on the resistance news services. We're not that different. We're not that different as people. And the minute you recognize that, you can start bringing down some of these walls and engaging with people who are different from you without fear. And fear makes people do some really callous stuff. I'm trying to figure out how to wrap because I just feel so bad for that guy. And I feel like what was done to him was so very wrong. And I guess that's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to do something real and tangible to show people who weren't believed, who deserve to be believed, it was wrong. Hopefully this will help you heal some. Okay? Mondays, that's what I do. It's got to be something healing or helpful or something like that. So that's what I'm doing here. All right. Hopefully it did help. Thanks for watching.